She bought a cabin for peace, but her family turned it into a nightmare, fearful-faced derelict house. Juno Reynolds, 29, stood before the small, charming two-bedroom cabin she bought on Lake Chelan in Washington State. After nearly a decade of saving, scrimping, and working multiple jobs, she had finally realized her dream. The view of the lake and surrounding mountains was everything she had imagined. The cabin represented independence, freedom, and years of hard work, a place where she could escape and recharge. It was her sanctuary, a symbol of her self-reliance, and she was determined to keep it just for herself. Her excitement was tempered with the realization that this achievement was only the beginning. Little did she know that her family's perception of this cabin would quickly turn it into something she'd have to defend, not just as a physical space, but as a personal boundary. One evening, Meline, Juno's older sister, called to ask if her family could stay at the cabin for a week during the upcoming winter break. Juno hesitated for a moment, but agreed. After all, it was a vacation property, and she had always wanted to share it with family. Meline, with her 3 young children, had been through a lot. Juno wanted to be supportive, despite feeling a little uncomfortable about the request. However, as Meline listed all the activities they would do at the cabin, Juno could sense that this was not going to be a casual visit. This was only the beginning of what she would come to realize was an unspoken expectation. The first time Meline and her family stayed at the cabin, Juno was excited to share her space. However, when they left, she found broken dishes, stained towels, and the utility bills had skyrocketed. Juno's concerns were brushed off by Meline with a simple, "Kids will be kids." The damage wasn't severe, but it was a stark reminder that sharing the space with her family wasn't without its costs, emotionally and financially. As Juno examined the bills, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Her generosity was being taken for granted. Despite the issues from the first visit, Meline asked to stay again. Juno agreed, albeit reluctantly. Once again, the same pattern emerged. Messes were left behind. The heating bill was higher than expected, and no acknowledgement of the disruption was made. Juno began to feel like her cabin was becoming a free vacation spot for Meline's family. Her hesitation grew, but she didn't want to appear ungrateful for the time she had shared. Yet, something inside her began to shift. The imbalance was no longer bearable. As summer approached, Meline asked Juno if her family could stay for 3 weeks. This time, Juno hesitated. 3 weeks was a long time to allow someone to stay at a property she worked hard for. The thought of footing the bill for utilities and maintenance during that period without any contribution began to feel like too much. She started to feel trapped in a situation where her boundaries were constantly being pushed. Meline, of course, had no issue with the request, as she assumed that family always helps family. No questions asked. Juno received a call from her parents, who were concerned about the situation. Meline had already played the victim card, claiming that Juno was being unreasonable. They argued that Juno should simply let Meline's family use the cabin for free, because she was financially well off. Juno explained that it wasn't about the money, but about respect for her property. Her parents didn't seem to understand, reiterating that family should help family. The emotional manipulation started to wear her down. Her parents sided with Meline, reinforcing the notion that Juno's success meant she should always give without expectation. Just as the tension with her family was reaching a boiling point, Juno received an urgent email from her property management company. The cabin had experienced some water damage during a heavy rainstorm, and the repair estimate was $3,500. The timing couldn't have been worse. With mounting bills and Meline's ongoing demands, Juno's financial situation was stretched thinner than ever. The repair was unexpected and left her feeling even more burdened, making Meline's request for another extended stay seem even more unreasonable. Meline continued to manipulate the situation, using guilt and emotional leverage to make Juno feel like she was the villain for even suggesting her family contribute to the utility bills. Meline's children were always the focus, and Juno was made to feel as if her role was to accommodate them, even when it meant sacrificing her own peace of mind. The idea of family, helping family, seemed to only flow one way, with Juno doing all the giving and Meline doing all the taking. Juno began to reflect on her upbringing. As the youngest of 4 siblings, she had learned early on to be independent. Her Her parents, though loving, had always been stretched thin financially. So Juno had developed a strong sense of self-reliance. Meline, on the other hand, had always played the role of the struggling mother with 3 kids and a tight budget. Over the years, she had perfected the art of asking for help, and Juno was often the one who ended up giving. Now, the pattern was repeating itself at the cabin, and Juno was starting to resent it. Juno finally decided that she needed to set clear boundaries. She couldn't keep accommodating Meline's family without it taking a toll on her emotionally and financially. After careful thought, Juno drafted an agreement outlining the terms for Meline's next stay at the cabin. She would cover the utilities for the duration of the stay. The security deposit would be required, and no additional guests would be allowed without prior approval. It wasn't an unreasonable request. It was a simple matter of respect for her property. Meline's response to the agreement was swift and dismissive. She accused Juno of being petty, calling the agreement a rental contract for family. Meline argued that asking for a security deposit was absurd. Juno stood her ground, refusing to let her sister manipulate her into feeling guilty for asserting her boundaries. Meline's attitude only solidified Juno's resolve. The days of allowing her family to take advantage of her generosity were over. The family dinner was set up by Juno's parents to address the issue. They all gathered around the table, with Juno's father leading the conversation. The tension was palpable as the family discussed the cabin agreement. Juno's parents sided with Meline, claiming that Juno was being too harsh. The phrase, "family helps family," was repeated, and Juno was once again made to feel like she was being selfish for asking her sister to contribute. It was clear to Juno that her parents had been enabling Meline's behavior for years. Meline's emotional manipulation reached new heights during the dinner. She brought up the kids, saying they were excited for their summer vacation, and how cruel it would be to disappoint them. Juno realized that Meline had already promised her children they would be staying at the cabin, positioning her as the villain if she refused. Juno felt cornered, but she knew she couldn't back down. Juno began to question the expectations her family had placed on her. Why was she always the one to accommodate everyone? Why was it assumed that her needs, her boundaries, and her property were less important than Meline's? Juno finally spoke up, calling attention to the fact that family helps family shouldn't mean one person constantly giving while others take without giving anything in return. Grace and Jason, Juno's other siblings, surprised her by speaking out in support of her. They acknowledged the imbalance and agreed that Meline had been taking advantage of Juno for years. It was a rare moment of solidarity among the siblings, and Juno felt a glimmer of hope that her stance was not as unpopular as she feared. Her parents, however, remained quiet, uncomfortable with the shift in perspective. The conversation took a turn when Juno's father finally acknowledged that the family had been enabling Meline's behavior for years. For the first time, Juno felt heard. Her parents began to understand how their actions had created an unhealthy dynamic, one where Meline's needs were always prioritized. It was a breakthrough, but Juno knew this would take time to change. Meline finally began to see the truth of what everyone had been saying. She admitted that she had been taking advantage of Juno's generosity and that it wasn't fair to always expect help without giving anything in return. Juno was cautiously optimistic, but she knew that this realization was just the first step in changing the family dynamic. After the family meeting, Juno received a call from her brother, Jason. Meline had shown their parents the agreement, and they were furious. Jason warned Juno that the fallout from this conversation would be intense, but he supported her decision. He also told Juno that Meline had reached out to their parents, trying to manipulate them further. It was clear that the battle wasn't over yet. Meline surprised Juno by acknowledging her previous behavior. The apology wasn't easy, and Meline admitted that she had been blind to how her actions had impacted Juno. "I see it now," she said quietly. "I always thought you had it easy, and I never realized how much you sacrifice for what you have." Juno listened, feeling a complex mix of relief and skepticism. It wasn't easy to forgive the years of taking for granted her generosity, but Meline's willingness to recognize her flaws marked the beginning of a shift. Juno spent the next few days revising the terms of her agreement. She lowered the security deposit and clarified the utility fees. It was a more reasonable version of her original draft, one that still protected her interests but allowed room for Meline's financial reality. She also added a detailed checkout checklist to ensure that the property was respected. It wasn't just a legal document. It was a testament to Juno's belief in fair exchange and boundaries. In the midst of this new negotiation, Meline presented a handwritten letter of apology. It was not just a formality, but an honest reflection of how she had taken Juno's kindness for granted. The letter came with a check to cover the previous damages, broken dishes, and other costs from past days. "I know this doesn't make up for everything," Meline wrote, "but I want to start making it right." Juno was taken aback. It was the first time Meline had acted like an equal, not someone entitled to everything because of her family status. The family met again, and this time the atmosphere was different. There was no defending Meline's actions. Instead, everyone was eager to find solution. Juno's parents, who had once insisted that she should always give, now seemed to grasp the importance of boundaries. They even agreed to cover the security deposit, acknowledging that their enabling behavior had allowed Meline to take advantage for years. It was a quiet moment of realization for everyone, and Juno felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The family meeting ended with a sense of resolution. Meline agreed to follow the terms laid out in the agreement, understanding that this was the first step toward restoring trust. The family discussed the importance of respecting each other's boundaries and maintaining balance in their relationships. For the first time, Juno felt like her voice had been heard, not just in her family, but in her own heart. Meline's family stayed at the cabin again that summer, but this time, things were different. The kids followed the rules, and the cabin was left in good condition. The utilities were paid as agreed, and the security deposit was returned after the stay. Juno was pleasantly surprised by how smoothly everything went. It felt like a genuine partnership, one where both sides respected each other's space, needs, and boundaries. It was a far cry from the messy, one-sided exchanges of the past. Meline began to show a new kind of generosity. She helped Juno with some tasks around the cabin, bringing over groceries and even offering to help with repairs. Juno was struck by how these gestures, small but meaningful, showed Meline's growing respect for her property and for her. It was a shift in the family dynamic that Juno had longed for. There were no more demands. Now there was a spirit of mutual support. With the success of the cabin arrangement, Juno found herself more comfortable setting boundaries in other areas of her life. Her parents, too, started to apply their newfound understanding of boundaries in their interactions with Meline. When Meline asked them for help watching the kids, they politely declined, citing prior commitments. It was a small change, but it marked a shift in how they viewed their responsibilities within the family. Over the following months, Meline showed more maturity. She stopped using the kids as a way to manipulate her family into doing things for her. She began to offer help without expecting anything in return. At family events, she no longer demanded that everyone pitch in for her family's expenses. Juno began to see her sister as someone who was learning, growing, and striving to do better, not just someone who always took without giving. The next summer, Juno invited Meline and her family to stay at the cabin for a few days. The difference was noticeable immediately. The kids were excited to help around the house, and there was no tension about the rules. Juno's role as a generous sister had been replaced by a mutual understanding that they were all equals. For the first time, they enjoyed their time together without feeling like it was an obligation. The cabin, which had once been a source of conflict, had now become a place of healing. Juno began to see the cabin as more than just a personal achievement. It had become a symbol of change within the family. It had catalyzed a shift from one-sided generosity to a more balanced dynamic. Juno's parents, who had always believed in family helps family, now understood that true support required reciprocity and respect. Juno felt a deep sense of pride, not just in owning the cabin, but in what it represented. A healthier, more equitable family. During a family barbecue, Meline took a moment to publicly apologize to Juno. "I know I've taken a lot from you over the years, and I want you to know how much I appreciate you," she said. Her words were sincere, and Juno could feel the weight of the apology. It wasn't easy for Meline to admit her mistakes, but it was a testament to the progress they had made as sisters. Juno smiled, accepting her sister's apology, knowing that they were finally in a place of mutual respect. Juno suggested a new tradition. Every summer, They would trade weekends. Juno would take care of the kids one weekend, and Meline would have the cabin the next. This idea of exchange, where each person gave and received equally, was a far cry from the old pattern of Juno always giving. The suggestion was met with enthusiasm, and it felt like a tangible way to continue the shift toward a more balanced family dynamic. The first shared weekend was a success. Meline's family stayed at the cabin, while Juno spent the weekend with her nieces and nephews, taking them on hikes and cooking meals. It felt natural. No one was demanding anything, and there was no resentment. For the first time, both Juno and Meline were enjoying each other's company, without feeling like they were doing favors for one another. It was a significant moment of growth. Meline's actions continued to surprise Juno. When Juno visited her parents, Meline offered to babysit her nieces and nephews so Juno could have some time to herself. She even sent a thoughtful care package to Juno, something she had never done before. It was a small act, but it felt like a genuine change in Meline's attitude. She was no longer taking. She was giving. Juno continued to assert her boundaries, not just with Meline, but with her parents as well. She had learned it was okay to say no, and that doing so didn't mean she didn't love her family. When her parents asked her to watch the kids during a busy season at work, Juno politely declined, stating that she needed to focus on her job. Her parents respected her decision, and Juno felt empowered by her ability to maintain her own life while still being a loving sister and daughter. Meline's perspective continued to evolve. She began to understand that life wasn't about surviving on others' generosity. It was about finding a balance between giving and receiving. She no longer expected Juno to carry the weight of her family's needs. The transformation wasn't instantaneous, but the slow, steady shift in her behavior became evident to everyone. The next summer, Juno and Meline spent an entire weekend together at the cabin, relaxing and reflecting on the changes in their relationship. There were no arguments, no resentments, just two sisters who had learned to appreciate each other's space, both physically and emotionally. The cabin had become a symbol of their renewed relationship. The family continued to talk openly about their relationships, their boundaries, and their expectations. Juno and Meline were both vocal about the importance of respect and reciprocity, and the family dynamic began to reflect these values. Juno no longer felt like she was constantly carrying the emotional weight of her family. Instead, they were all supporting each other. Juno embraced her independence fully, no longer afraid to say no when something didn't align with her needs. She had learned that being a good sister and daughter didn't mean sacrificing her own happiness. In fact, it made her a better family member because she could give freely when she had the energy and the resources to do so. Meline continued to grow, both as a sister and a mother. She no longer used her children as a way to manipulate others. Instead, she modeled responsibility and gratitude for them, showing them what it meant to contribute to the family in a meaningful way. The cabin was still a cherished sanctuary for Juno, but now it represented more than just her independence. It had become a symbol of the changes in her family's relationships based on mutual respect, understanding, and a healthy balance of give and take. Juno was no longer just a giver. She was an equal in the family. The changes in the family continued to ripple out. Meline offered help to Jason and Grace without being asked, and Juno no longer felt like she was constantly carrying the burden of family obligations. The pattern of one-sided support had been replaced with genuine care and respect. The family had become united, not through sacrifice and obligation, but through understanding and reciprocity. Everyone now understood the value of giving without expectation and receiving with gratitude. It was a transformation that had been years in the making. Meline made one final apology to Juno, acknowledging all the ways she had taken advantage of her sister over the years. Juno accepted the apology, knowing that this was the end of the old patterns and the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship. Juno reflected on how far she had come. She had learned the power of setting boundaries and the importance of standing up for herself. The cabin was no longer just a place of escape. It was a symbol of the personal growth she had experienced. The family had found peace. No longer did Juno feel burdened by the expectations placed on her. No longer did Meline manipulate the situation to get what she wanted. Instead, they were all equals, sharing in each other's lives in a balanced way. Juno realized that sacrifice wasn't about giving endlessly. It was about knowing when to say no and when to give, and doing so from a place of abundance rather than obligation. The balance she had found had changed her view on family and what it meant to support each other. Meline's new perspective was evident in her actions. She no longer expected anything for free and started offering her help without being asked. It was a stark contrast to the entitled attitude she had once displayed. The new family tradition of sharing the cabin became a cherished ritual. Everyone looked forward to their weekends together, knowing that they were creating memories without the burden of obligation. The family continued to change, with each member learning to respect one another's space and needs. The dynamic had shifted from one of imbalance to one of understanding and mutual care. As the years passed, the family continued to thrive. The lessons learned from Juno's stand on the cabin created a foundation of respect and reciprocity. The cabin, once a symbol of Juno's independence, had become a symbol of a healthier, more balanced family dynamic. And as Meline smiled at Juno during a family barbecue, saying, "Next time, we'll bring our own paddle boards," Juno knew that they had finally found a balance she had always hoped for.